It was one of those things that everybody knew but was too polite to say. Each year, about 1 million biomedical studies are published in the scientific literature, and many of them are simply wrong. Set aside the voice of God prose, the fancy statistics, and the peer review process, which is supposed to weed out the weak and errant. Lots of this stuff just doesn't stand up to scrutiny. Sometimes it's because a scientist is exploring the precarious edge of knowledge. Sometimes the scientist has unconsciously willed the data to tell a story that's not in fact true. Occasionally, there is outright fraud. But a large share of what gets published is wrong. C. Glenn Begley decided to say what most other people dared not speak. An Australian-born scientist, he had left academia after 25 years in the lab to head up cancer research at the pioneering biotech company Amgen in Southern California. While working in academia, Begley had co-discovered a protein called human GCSF, which is now used in cancer treatments to reconstitute a person's immune system after a potentially lethal dose of chemotherapy. GCSF ultimately proved to be Amgen's first blockbuster drug, so it's not surprising that years later, when the company wanted to create an entire cancer research program, it hired Begley for the job. Pharmaceutical companies rely heavily on published research from academic labs, which are largely funded by taxpayers, to get ideas for new drugs. Companies can then seize upon those ideas, develop them, and make them available as new treatments. Begley's staff scoured the biomedical literature for hot leads for potential new drugs. Every time something looked promising, they'd start a dossier on the project. Begley insisted that the first step of any research project would be to have company scientists repeat the experiment to see if they could come up with the same results. Most of the time, Amgen labs couldn't. That was duly noted on the dossier, the case was closed, and the scientists moved on to the next exciting idea reported in the scientific literature. After 10 years at Amgen, Begley was ready to move on. But before he went, he wanted to take stock of the studies that his team had filed away as not reproducible, focusing in particular on the ones that could have led to important drugs if they had panned out. He chose 53 papers he considered potentially groundbreaking. And for this review, the company didn't simply try to repeat the experiments. Begley asked the scientists who originally published these exciting results to help. The vast majority of the time, the scientists were willing to work with us. There were only a couple of occasions where truly the scientists hung up on us and refused to continue the conversation, he said. First, Begley asked the scientists to provide the exact materials that they had used in the original experiment. If Amgen again couldn't reproduce the results with this material, they kept trying. On about 20 occasions, we actually sent company scientists to the host laboratory and watched them perform experiments themselves, Begley told me. This time, however, the original researchers were kept in the dark about which part of the experiment was supposed to produce positive results and which would serve as a comparison group, the control. Most of the time, the experiments failed under these blinded conditions. So it wasn't just that Amgen was unable to reproduce them, Begley said. What was more shocking to me was the original investigators themselves were not able to. Of the 53 original exciting studies that Begley put to the test, he could reproduce just 6. 6. That's barely 1 out of 10. Begley went to the Amgen board of directors and asked what he should do with this information. They told him to publish it. The German drug maker Bayer had undertaken a similar project and got nearly as desultory results. It was able to replicate 25% of the studies it re-examined. That study, published in a specialty journal in September 2011, hadn't sparked a lot of public discussion. Begley thought his study would gain more credibility if he recruited an academic scientist as a co-author. Lee Ellis from the MD Anderson Cancer Center in Houston lent his name and analysis to the effort. He, too, had been outspoken about the need for more rigor in cancer research. When the journal Nature published their commentary in March 2012, people suddenly took notice. Begley and Ellis had put this issue squarely in front of their colleagues. They were hardly treated as heroes. Robert Weinberg, a prominent cancer researcher at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, told me, "To my mind, that paper was a testimonial to the silliness of the people in industry, their naivete and their lack of competence.